Hello, this is Edmund Shing from BCS Asset Management. Today we are going to look at the Global Mega Themes Fund and two themes in particular. The Mega Themes Fund has four themes. Firstly, we have the Internet of Things. Secondly, we have the energy revolution in the US and Europe. Thirdly, we have the emerging market consumer growth. And fourthly, we have US and UK housing. In this presentation, we're going to focus on the first two themes, which are the Internet of Things, so technology, and the energy revolution, principally oil and gas. So, let's start with oil and gas. Here on page 4, you can see that production growth in the US of gas, of natural gas, is going to increase substantially between now and 2040. And this is driven by increase in production of shale gas. Here on page 5, we can also see that oil production is climbing very quickly thanks to oil sands and again shale oil production, and that by next year, 2015, it is estimated that the US will match their peak oil output, which was back in 1970. So a very strong growth in oil production as well. Here on page 6, we see one reason why I like to focus on oil service companies, and that is that the inflation rate for oil services in the US is running at about 11 to 12% per year. And this is independent of oil and gas prices. You can see here that energy inflation is 0 to negative in the US, but despite that, oil services are able to raise prices by 11 to 12% per year. So they have very strong pricing power. Another area I like related to shale oil and shale gas production is what we call fracking sand. This is the special sand that is pumped down into wells to force the oil and the gas to come up to the surface. Here we have 3 companies in the US that are specialized in fracking sand: High Crush Partners, Emerge Energy Services, and Silica. And these 3 companies I think are very attractive because they should enjoy strong growth in demand for this fracking sand. And finally, we can see on page 8 that the earnings growth outlook for the oil services sector in the US is strong, with 14% earnings growth forecast for this year, and then an even stronger 21% earnings growth forecast for next year, both of which are far faster than for the overall S&P 500 index. Now turning to the second theme, technology and the Internet of Things. Here on page 10, we can see that there has been rapid rise in use of the Internet by adults in the US, from 14% of adults in 1995 to 87% today. So it looks pretty saturated and very little growth left. However, when you look outside of the US, you look to emerging markets such as Russia, China, South Africa, or even Ghana, as on this chart on page 11, you can see that there is plenty more to go in terms of internet adoption in emerging markets. Here on this chart, China at 55% is where the US was back in the year 2000. So there is plenty of growth in use of the internet in emerging markets, and that gives us plenty of potential growth for technology companies. Here on page 12, we can also see that forecasts for global shipments of smartphones, so that is internet-enabled telephones, will continue to grow very strongly from over 1.1 billion handsets in 2014 to nearly 1.6 billion handsets by 2017. So continued strong growth and therefore very strong demand for microprocessors, semiconductors, and other components used in smartphones, and also strong growth in use of the internet via mobile phones. Another sub-theme which is interesting within technology is the growth of big data. So we can see here that the growth in big data, having been 54% forecast for this year, will still be 35% again in 2015 and then 15% again in 2016. So we expect to see continued strong growth in data storage as a result. And we will, as consumers, prefer more and more solid state hard drives, labeled SSD in this chart on page 14. And again, we expect to see very strong growth for these solid state hard drives, which are made not using mechanical parts, but using semiconductor chips, NAND flash memory to be exact. We expect to see strong growth over the next 3 years in demand as prices come down. And yet, here on page 15, if you look at old technology companies, companies which are well established and very large, such as Apple, Cisco, Corning, Hewlett-Packard, or Intel, you can see that after taking out the cash, that these companies trade on a very low valuation multiple of 11 times PE for 2014, which is 31% lower than the PE ratio for the S&P 500. So these companies are actually still very cheap on valuation, whilst also being exposed to this technology growth theme. So, to sum up, within our Global Mega Themes Fund, we like both the oil revolution, oil and gas in the US, and shale. We also like the technology sector, the Internet of Things, ideas such as big data and internet security. And you will find in our Global Mega Themes portfolio companies that represent these two themes. This is Edmund Shing from BCS saying thank you for listening.